Hello, good evening. The medieval astrologer searching for an auspicious date would turn to planetary configurations and stargazing. The modern-day politician is not perhaps so different, except his tools are the latest opinion polls, by-elections and the millstone of public perception. Gordon Brown can expect to see little of the coming weekend. He's likely to spend the next 48 hours consolidating all the facts at his fingertips before deciding when to go for a general election. Those urging him to go early may use a populist poll in tomorrow's Times as evidence. The first poll since his conference speech suggests Labour's lead has increased. They're on 41%, the Conservatives are put on 31% and the Lib Dems 17%. Liz Mackean analyses just what factors will push him to the crucial call.
It's his call to make, and Gordon Brown will spend the weekend in deep thought before finally allowing his closest advisers a glimpse of his innermost thoughts on the timing of the next big ballot. How might recent opinion polls guide the Prime Minister's thinking? At the start of the year, David Cameron's Conservatives were riding high with a settled lead over the government. In June, when Gordon Brown took over, their paths crossed, and now the Labour Party can point to a steady 3-month lead over the Conservatives. But so what?
If we were in the position now that Gordon Brown only had a year to go, he was going to have an election pretty soon anyway, these kind of results, these kind of data would probably suggest it's worth going. It's unlikely you're going to lose and you might win quite well. But given this is going to take place early, given that the aim is not simply to win but to win well, I think one has to say to him that your chances of achieving that are perhaps not much better than evens, and therefore you have to decide whether or not it's actually worth risking 3 years in office and 3 years with a secure parliamentary majority for what looks little better, and for the benefit of gaining another 2 years for what looks not much better than an evens chance.
In 1970, the Labour government had also been trailing the Conservatives, and then, as now, suddenly overtook them. Harold Wilson still had a year or so to run, but with a 2-month lead in the polls, he called an election and lost it.
We are in volatile times at the moment in terms of public opinion. It does have to be viewed in the light of the fact that we're right in the middle of the conference season, and I personally, being rather cautious, would want to see a longer run of stable polls with one party ahead of the other in some sort of stable format across different polling companies before I would say, yes, that seems to be the settled state of public opinion.
So there's a risk to calling an election now, and also a risk to not calling it. It's enough to make a cautious man trip.
This election is very special because the question isn't just when, it's whether or if. He doesn't actually have to have an election. And if he calls one, he's only going to gain 2 years of being in power. He might feel very silly if, as a result of this election, he gets a smaller majority, or he gets no majority at all. And I think that's got to haunt him. So if Gordon Brown's famous caution, that calculating instinct, is really there, and his desire to set everything up strategically and be completely solid, he wouldn't call an election.
The latest poll for tomorrow's Times newspaper confirms the Brown bounce. It gives Labour a post-conference lead of 10 points, a trend reflected in internet polling. On the other hand, the results of 9 council by-elections last night were disappointing for Labour, particularly in Sunderland, their very backyard, where the Conservatives won a seat. What is a Prime Minister supposed to think?
You enjoying this? Yeah. Do you want to be a hairdresser? Is that your plan?
Mr. Brown can't afford to see his majority trimmed. For an early election to be worthwhile, he must win it and win it well.
It's important to bear in mind that Gordon Brown's objective in an early election is not simply to win, but it's actually to do at least as well as Labour did in 2005, if not better. That is to get an overall majority of 66. If he fails to reach that target, people were saying that Labour Party have fallen back, and he hasn't got the personal mandate, which would be the reason for holding the early election.
Among the many considerations Mr. Brown will be turning over in his mind are the polls after the conference season is over. Only then will he know if he has a stable lead. But it doesn't give him much time to call an election before winter closes in.
I know what he ought to do. Well, I think if I were advising him, I would say that he has to wait, simply because the timings, the fact that we're in the conference season, means that he cannot rely upon the polls, particularly those done mid-conference season. Therefore, I don't think he really has an alternative but to wait. Keeping everybody guessing unsettles the Conservative Party in particular, and that's no bad thing, I guess, where he's concerned.
In Bournemouth, the tide of conference opinion turned decisively during the week towards an early election. Mr Brown, of course, kept his own counsel. We'll know more of the way his mind is working after he's spent the weekend